Your heart's racing, your palms are sweaty, ideas are flooding your brain, but you're just not grasping the question. You're in an interview and you're freaking out. What do you do? Today, we're going to talk about ways to bounce back from an interview that's going south while you're in the interview. So stay tuned. What's up, Explearners? Welcome back to our Communication Conundrum series. So let's get you up to speed for those of you who are just joining us today. We're talking about ways of dealing with communication conundrums while they're happening and after they happen so that we're better prepared in the future to deal with them and even prevent them. We're equipping you with various strategies that'll help you deal with uncomfortable situations and sticky communication situations that do happen. Miscommunications, public speaking, hecklers, interviews that go wrong, workplace confrontations, the list goes on. And the core of these strategies are all about assuming responsibility for our communication and for our communication outcomes. So you're messing up the interview. Don't blame the hiring manager. Don't blame the questions. Don't blame the weather. Blame yourself. It's time to look inward. So before you blame anyone else, watch this video. Today, we're talking about an interview that's going awry, and you're in the middle of the interview and you feel like you're losing control. The hiring manager is looking at you strange. You're not really getting the questions. You know that you're not doing well. So what do you do about it? For those of you who've been there, we've all been there. This can be a really uncomfortable situation when we feel like we're vulnerable and we have no idea how to take back the power, how to take back control. So these strategies, the 6 strategies we're giving you today, are going to help you check yourself and try to bounce back from the interview that's going south. Now, sometimes we have the ability to change it. Other times we don't. And in that case, you will look back on that interview as a teachable moment. And there's always feedback in failure. So don't ever think of it as the end of your interviewing, at the end all be all of everything. My advice to you would be to keep these in your back pocket so that you can pull them out of your communication toolkit if you need to. So before we complain about the hiring manager, the work environment, the room that you're interviewing in, the weather, the traffic, any other excuse but yourself, it's time we take back control. And it starts with looking at what you're doing. And sometimes what you're doing is not working. So the first strategy in trying to bounce back from an interview that's going south, are you ready for this one? You want to slow it down. When we get nervous, we tend to ramble on, and that opens up the space for blurting out answers. It leaves room for a lot of error because we're not thinking about what we say. It opens up the floor to fillers, which are not necessary and should be avoided in this type of communication situation because it makes us seem like we're unprepared. So what you do is you slow it down. Make sure that you are taking time to speak and that you are really thinking about what you want to say, constructing a thoughtful response that's answering the question. Just because you're talking doesn't mean you're answering the interviewer's question, right? So you have to make sure that you are really being deliberate about your answers. And make sure that you're using pause. Pause is a great way to keep you on track, to make sure you have your talking points in mind, and to let the hiring manager soak up what you're telling them. Because if you're talking too fast, that's not only going to detract from what you are saying, but also it won't give the hiring manager the chance to actually digest the information you're sharing. So it's on both sides a plus when you slow it down. Number 2, remember the job description. So before you even set foot in the interview room, you have probably spent time on what the interviewer would ask you, right? So that means that you looked at the job description, you prepared a couple of talking points, and you looked at your resume and your background and your skills and looked at how they can shed light upon the role that you are interviewing for, right? So you have this idea as to how your skills fit in with what they're looking for. So if all else fails, try to think about what was listed on the job description. What were the primary skills? What were the secondary skills? And if you even took it a step further, as I suggested in the tell me about yourself and the tell me about your weaknesses, you would remember to think about the tertiary skills that are not listed, but that you've deduced, that you've read between the lines. So if you even have your tertiary skills, then you can speak to the job description. And that's a really great way of getting you back on track. So let's say you're being asked a question and you don't know how to answer it, and you feel like you're at a loss for words and you're not sure what exactly they're asking. Well, chances are it has to do with something about the role. And they're probably trying to get at what's listed in the job description. So keep that job description fresh in your mind so that you can point to it and show and connect the dots for the hiring manager about how your skills and your XP points and your background and your experience fit nicely into what they would like you to do in that role. Keep that JD fresh in your mind. And this way you can talk about the value you can add to the company. Number 3, check your nonverbals. Sometimes it's as easy as just sitting up straight with our shoulders back and down and making sure that we're not tense in our face, because when we're nervous and when we're stressed, it shows on our face. So that is going to change the way the hiring manager is interacting with you. If they're talking to somebody who's relaxed and confident, the interview is going to go more smoothly. If they're talking to somebody who's tensed up, who's slouching over, whose arms are crossed, that's going to change the way they interact with that person, right? And it's true of any type of human interaction, social interaction settings, right? So nonverbals are really important. So make sure that you're making eye contact with the hiring manager, that your arms aren't crossed, but instead are on your lap or folded nicely on the table, and that you're using appropriate hand gestures sporadically throughout your answering the question, right? So you don't want to overdo it, but you also just want to add a little bit here and there to show a natural way of communicating, and make sure that you have a slight smile on your face because it shows that you are relaxed. So these are little things that we can check in the middle of the interview to make sure that we're giving off the right signal, not only to our own brains, but also to the hiring manager. So again, it goes both ways. So if you strike a power pose, maybe not in the interview, but if you do, have your posture the way you want it to be, nice and professional and confident, that is going to send the message to your brain that you are confident, even if you're not. And that'll also send that signal to the hiring manager. And they're going to want to hire somebody who's confident and at ease and comfortable, because it shows that you're well suited for the job, and you are, even if you don't feel confident in that singular moment. Number 4, listen to the question. A lot of times when we're nervous, instead of really listening to the question and making sure we've got the question, we just pick up a few words here and there that the hiring manager is saying without putting the whole question together. And then quickly our mind is racing and we're trying to formulate a thoughtful response. Well, guess what? If you haven't really listened to the question, it's a trap then. You're not going to be able to answer the question the way you want it to. You have to wait, and you really have to laser focus on the question. So you're not thinking about how you answer. You're not thinking about what you're going to have for lunch or what workout you're going to do later today. You're listening to the question. Once you get the question, you can answer it. But let's say you haven't really understood the question. Then it is okay to ask a clarification question or a follow-up, or ask the hiring manager to repeat the question. That is okay. It is not going to reflect negatively on you that you didn't grasp the question, because maybe the hiring manager did not convey the message as well as they could have. Maybe it was unclear as to what they were asking. The hiring manager is not perfect. Neither are you. And it is okay to ask a follow-up. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Could you please clarify that question? Something like that. Simple and easy. You're not trying to answer a question that you didn't understand in the first place. Because if you do that, if you guess what the question is and you answer it incorrectly, that is a much bigger issue that potentially could reflect negatively on you. So you want to make sure that you have the question and that you're crystal clear on it so that you can answer it, right? The other part of this is to take thinking time. So once they've asked you the question, it's okay to take a few seconds, pause, think, okay? Thinking is important here. You really want to make sure that you're not blurting out an answer, that you're not using fillers. If you wanted to buy yourself some thinking time without silence, because some people are uncomfortable with silence, then I would suggest that you use some hedging devices. So you might say, well, that's a great question. I hadn't thought of that question before. Let me see. Let me think about that for a second. It's okay to do this. I think what would be better is to just add a little silence there. It shows that you're thinking. Number 5, be sure to breathe. Now, we're not talking about full-on Om sessions here. That's great, but you would do that ahead of the interview. Because you're in the middle of the interview and it's unfolding before you and it's not going so great, you might want to check if you're breathing. When we get really nervous, we get short of breath. We get in that panicky state and then we're short of breath. Our heart rate starts to race and then it's downhill from there. So what you can do to bounce back from this interview that's going south is to check your breathing. Make sure that you're taking nice, long, deep breaths. You don't have to make it obvious, right? You're not going to be doing the breathing techniques that will calm you down, but you do want to make sure that you're slowing down your breathing. And this could be before you're answering a question. It could be while they're talking. It could be while there's a little pause in the conversation so that you can breathe, right? So don't forget to breathe. And the last strategy, number 6, if all else fails, it's okay to ask for a rain check. Let's say you've really tried your best to do the other strategies that we've discussed in this video, like breathing and slowing it down and checking your nonverbals and asking for clarification. If that's still not allowing you to perform the way you want to, then maybe you're just having a bad day. Maybe there's something else in your life that's going on that's distracting you at that moment. And that is okay. It might be a good idea to voice that and express it to the hiring manager and explain why this is happening. And if you're really passionate about the role and enthusiastic about working at this place, then, and of course, if you're qualified, which you probably are because you got the interview, right? Then why not tell them, look, I'm not really having a good day right now. There's something wrong. Or maybe you're unwell. Maybe you have a flu or something. Maybe you have a fever and you're not performing well. Ask for a rain check. You can even take it a step further. And when you're writing a thank you note or doing a follow-up email, tell them that you'd really appreciate rescheduling the interview if it's possible. And they might take you up on it. Of course, every situation is different. But again, if all else fails, then another way to bounce back from this interview that's going south is to ask for a rain check. All right, Explearners, let's quickly recap before we go. The issue that we're dealing with right now, the communication conundrum that we're trying to solve is an interview that is going south. Sometimes we're in interviews and they're just not going the way we want them to. Sometimes it has to do with us. Sometimes it has to do with something we have no control over that affects us still. Whatever the reason, you are going through the 6 strategies here to help you recover from the interview that's going south so that you have a chance at doing well. And the thing that you can always do, let's say you've done the strategies, you can always end strong with asking stellar questions at the end of the interview. When they ask you, do you have any questions for me? Right? So that would be another way of helping yourself in this situation. Have these in the back of your mind. Keep them in your communication toolkit so that you can use them and rely on them when you need to. We've addressed this problem in 6 ways so that you can turn that interview around and have a chance at really putting yourself out there in a positive way and in a way that reflects what you want to the hiring manager, right? Be positive. Know that you've done your best, especially after doing those 6 strategies to try to recover from the situation. And if all else fails, then you can treat this interview as a learning experience, find a teachable moment in it, and always remember that there's an element of feedback in failure. Treat failure as feedback so that you can learn from it and make sure that you don't repeat it next time. But it all comes down to taking responsibility and looking and checking ourselves what we can do better, what we can fix for future interviews. Now, in the next video, we're talking about how to bounce back from a rough interview, and this is after the fact. What we discussed today was what to do during the fact so that you can bounce back. But in the next video lesson, we're talking about ways to recover from an interview that went pretty badly and what to do about it. So be sure to catch us in that video. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe so that you can catch us in the next video and be up to speed on all things related to communicating effectively with confidence, authenticity, and poise. I'll see you in the next video. Happy exploring!